morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are joining us from. Thank you for joining our session this morning. We're really excited about the topic that we're going to be discussing today, which is looking at how we can scale FSM solutions. So I'm Miriam Otu. I'm a senior associate at Tetra Tech ERD based out in Washington, DC. We have a list of really impressive presenters for our session this morning. As I noted, Tetra Tech has been working for over 4 decades in the wash sector, supporting governments in improving sector governance, building capacity of local private sectors. We're very pleased to be an exhibitor here at FSM 6. And so I would implore you to check out our virtual booth where you can learn more about our programs. I'm very pleased to note that we are co-convening this session with a number of USAID projects, including the Washroom Program, as well as the Uganda Sanitation Health Activity. We're also partnering with the Center for Water and Sanitation at Cept University based in India. We are partnering with WhatsApp Bangladesh, as well as Zambia's National Water Supply and Sanitation Council. So if I could request for the presenters, if possible, to turn on your video so that our participants are able to see who our presenters are. So the main premise for this session was really in trying to understand and explore how we can scale FSM solutions, moving beyond the pilot level, but ensuring that it's not only sustainable FSM solutions, but that also ensure that we're increasing access, particularly to underserved populations. I think that all of us on here are aware that we've made significant advancements with improving basic sanitation, but with that, we've seen an exponential increase in toilets and containment systems. And a lot of developing countries are on the trajectory where they're going to have largely non-sewered sanitation systems. If we look at India, for example, 850 million plus people depend on fecal sludge management. And so whilst different countries are on different trajectories in terms of where they are largely, we know that fecal sludge management is still a very nascent sector and largely exist in institutional and regulatory vacuums. And so in order for us to actually get to a point where we have sustainable solutions, but also we're able to scale these solutions, we have to look at different factors related, for example, to market-driven mechanisms, supportive institutions, but also effective regulations, and a whole slew of factors that will really ensure that whatever FSM solutions we are investing in are sustainable, but also can go to scale. So the main premise of our session is to explore some successful cases in Africa and in Asia, and hopefully we can glean and share learnings, but really focus on looking at how these different elements and factors really can contribute to scaling FSM solutions so that we're not just looking at pilot level interventions that are actually not having any impact, particularly for underserved populations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with Ms. Ella Lazarte from USAID, who is going to be providing opening remarks for our session. So Ella is a senior water and sanitation advisor in USAID Center for Water Security, Sanitation, and Hygiene. She leads her agency's private sector engagement and finance work in the water security, sanitation, and hygiene sector. Ella, hand it over to you to open up the session.
Thanks so much. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning to everybody. It's exciting to be with this group today, talking about a topic that I have long been passionate about, that has both professional and personal significance for me. My entry and now journey into the water and sanitation sector started precisely because of my interest in the private sector and its contribution and its potential to contribute to public service delivery. And just indulge me for a couple minutes to talk a little bit about history, because it does have a bearing on what we do now, or it's great to see how far we've come along. So I became interested in this because of a graduate school professor of mine who was then at MIT, Jenna Davis, who's now at Stanford, who taught water and sanitation in low income countries and shared studies about what you can do in developing countries and the role of different organizations. And in that particular setting, she taught the class about the role of small scale providers in the delivery of water and sanitation services. And that was around the time that publications were coming out from the World Bank's Water and Sanitation Program, or WSP, where I actually spent 10 years of my career precisely working on promoting domestic private sector participation in water and sanitation service delivery. And so to me, it's really exciting because we've come a long way from the humble beginnings of piloting programs or looking at the pit emptiers in Kibera, Kenya, to now thinking about larger scale solutions to the issue of fecal sludge management, and really thinking about citywide inclusive sanitation and looking at how these solutions fit in the long term, and really thinking about how on-site sanitation systems are no longer seen as a temporary solution on a trajectory to sewerage, but instead as a viable solution in itself. And we've come a long way from the shit flow diagram, or the that an old friend and former manager of mine, Peter Hawkins, doodled on a piece of paper many years ago while working in Maputo together. And we've come a long way from that to discussing what our great panelists here will share today. And we've come a long way that I'm so excited about the possibilities and the potential of FSM in all corners of the world where sewerage solutions is not feasible, or it will take many more decades before that will become a reality, such as the island where I came from, where I grew up in the Philippines. But for these possibilities to become a reality, we still have a lot of work today. So yes, I'm excited, but it's also cautious optimism, right? Because successful implementation and scaling of sustainable and viable FSM solutions requires greater engagement of public and private sector players to address key technical, financial, and enabling environment challenges. In the last few years under USAID's WashFin program, that Miriam mentioned before, we have been supporting companies developing utility scale sanitation technology solutions in urban settings, such as in Senegal, which Barbara, Ms. Senkwe will talk about a little bit later, in Kenya and India. I know there will be a presentation in India. The public sector has a critical role in creating an enabling environment, including policies and regulations targeted at FSM, defining budget priorities, mobilizing additional sources of finance, and strengthening capacity of service providers. And on the other hand, the private sector has a role in defining and providing technologies, assisting the public sector to embrace these technologies, resource mobilization, capacity building, etc. And so it's really great to see countries that are increasingly experimenting with FSM, and you'll hear about them today, and how it fits into the whole citywide inclusive sanitation framework. This framework didn't even exist over a decade ago. And so what are the experiences showing us? What are the main challenges? What are the potential opportunities for scaling up? And how can public and private sector work better together? So that's what I want us to think about as you hear about the presentations today. And really, to wrap up, I want to highlight USAID commitment to the cause. It is important for development partners such as ourselves to embed these issues in our strategies, in our own programs and procurements, so that there's large-scale acceptance and promotion of these ideas. These ideas don't just happen by accident. It has to be promoted. So the fact that I told you about the history of over 10, 15 years ago, there were already some conversations about this, and those were embedded into policies and programs of these organizations and also governments promoting it. That's what it took, and that's what it's taken us to where we are today. And we're working on many different partnerships with others in our global and bilateral programs. You will hear a lot of acronyms right now, but it's just to show you how far we've come at USAID. And that's why I'm really excited to be here with you and learn more. So we have the WASHFIN program, the Uganda Sanitation for Health, usha activity that you'll hear more about, Muni Wash in West Africa, IU Wash Plus in Indonesia, a new activity in India that looks at skill development in fecal, sludge, and septic management, as well as a credit financing facility. And so these are just some of the examples of what we're doing. And we've embedded this in our global water strategy, in our water and development technical briefs that maybe some of you are familiar with. It's to guide our implementation of our program throughout the world. And so I just wanted to end with that and how excited I am to have this discussion, and looking forward to hearing more from the panelists and as well as the audience. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that history and insightful remarks, Ella. So as I noted in the beginning, we have examples from Asia as well as experiences from Africa, and we note that different countries and even cities within countries are in a different trajectory in terms of providing sustainable FSM services. And so we're going to start with a case in India, where USET University is doing amazing work in Maharashtra and working closely with the government in developing, implementing, and also scaling an inclusive fecal, sludge, and septic management business model. And we have Arwa Barma, who is a program lead at CWAS at CET University, and really working to catalyze urban change through her research and capacity development activities and so forth, and working very closely with the City of Y on their Citywide Inclusive Sanitation Program. Arwa, over to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Miriam. And hello, everyone. Miriam, I'll just share my screen.
And while Arwa works on sharing her screen, I just wanted to note that we have our chat and Q&A functions at the bottom, and so during the presentation, please feel free to pose your questions, and my colleague Neil will field those to me and to the presenters, and we'll try our best to try and answer those. But there's also time during the panel discussion and a Q&A session where we'll be addressing those in more detail. Arwa?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Arwa Bharmal from the Center for Water and Sanitation, CET University. Today, I shall be presenting on the topic Inclusive Fecal, Sludge and Septage Management Business Model, a case of Maharashtra state in India. Yeah. So over the past few years, FSSM has received the much required attention, and a national FSSM policy has been adopted in India. One of the major programs for FSSM is the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, which was launched in August 2014. Now, much of our work on FSSM has been in the state of Maharashtra, wherein the state government has proactively taken up FSSM expansively, due to which it is one of the pioneering states to be declared ODF in October 2017. Now, the state is moving towards ODF plus and plus plus, meaning towards safe conveyance and treatment. Now, Maharashtra began citywide inclusive FSSM services in 2014 in two cities of Y and Sinnar. It was for the first time in India that an effort to desludge septic tanks regularly was implemented as a public service involving the private sector. For financing the desludging services, both the cities have levied a sanitation tax. Online monitoring systems have been implemented, and more importantly, both the city governments have shown commitment towards continuing to provide these services. Now, let's have a look at the performance linked annuity model, which is referred to as a PLAM model. A performance based contract was for desludging was developed for both the cities. Now, payments under these contracts are made against a number of septic tanks emptied and safely discharged at a designated treatment site. The key clauses in the contract enforce high performance standard and safety compliance at the time of desludging the trucks, requirement of safety gears for workers, quality of suction truck, cleaning up of spillage, etc. Now, this contract is a service level agreement which protects the interest of all parties, be it the private sector, be it the city governments, or be it the citizens. It has helped local government to receive quality, regular desludging services for all its properties. While the private service providers make investments in trucks, they get a fixed business and assurance of monthly payments against a number of septic tanks that have been emptied. Now, the risk of late payment by local government was raised by several private service providers in various pre-bid meetings. Now, in order to mitigate this, an escrow account mechanism, which is like a tripartite agreement between the local government, the private sector, and the bank, was introduced. The local government is required to keep 3 months of contract payment as reserve fund to safeguard the risk of delayed payments. Now, coming to the aspects on inclusivity, which have been covered in this plan model, there are many aspects on inclusivity. Firstly, due to scheduled emptying being implemented as a municipal service to all properties, ensures that low income households and those staying in slums are also being able to receive the service regularly. The taxes are equitable and affordable since it is linked to local taxes rather than user charges. An escrow mechanism is in place that safeguards risk of delayed payments to the private sector. Now, looking at inclusivity from an angle of sanitation worker perspective. Due to clauses in the contract, it was ensured that safety compliance of all sanitation workers is maintained. Workers used the protective equipments, and most importantly, manual scavenging was eliminated due to the use of mechanized equipments. IT enabled monitoring systems have ensured that there is inclusive service delivery. Women and other vulnerable groups have been made aware of the FSM services. And in a way, the FSSM has also created livelihood opportunities. Now, all properties have been covered for desludging under this approach, including the vulnerable and slum households. Apart from slums, all other vulnerable properties are also covered in this service, like BPL card holders, households with low income and expenditure, households dependent on community toilets, etc. Such a spatial mapping that you see here has been possible due to the use of IT-enabled monitoring systems. Now, the contract also included awareness that was to be performed by the private service provider. That was to ensure that all properties avail the service. They know that such a service is going to happen and there is a high acceptance rate. Now, coming to the financing aspect of this, for financing the scheduled desludging services, both the cities have levied sanitation tax. Now, the sanitation tax is part of an overall property tax which is paid annually by the property owners. Now, this allows it to be more equitable as those with larger and better properties pay a high property tax. This will also make desludging services more affordable for the low income groups. The sanitation tax ensures that adequate funds are available for annuity payments to the private service provider. Now, coming to inclusion, women are getting involved in the process of desludging and FSTP operations. Both the local governments in these cities have been building capacities of elected women representatives, which is the political wing of the city, who are responsible for taking major decisions on FSM. So, due to these training programs, they have been really effective and have been able to participate effectively in local governance. Involving women SHGs in landscaping and urban forestry work, which uses the FSTP resources. This is one aspect now that we have been able successfully implemented in the city of Sinnar, wherein a contract has been given to a SHG group for maintenance of garden and urban forest. Now, women have also been sensitized at household level regarding the process of desludging. And lastly, celebrating women's sanitation champions in these cities and acknowledging their participation at all levels. IT-enabled monitoring system has played a major role in making sure that the services are inclusive. In both the cities, SaniTap and SaniTrack app have been successfully been used by the local government. Due to these monitoring systems, we have been able to spatially assess that which areas in the cities have been covered, like the vulnerable areas have been covered or not, that we are able to track. Now, from the view of sanitation workers, safety has been ensured through clauses on safety compliance, mandatory use of PPE by the private operators for desludging. Now, we found that based on the experience of desludging, both the local councils have now introduced clauses relating to provision, usage, and monitoring of PPE in all their upcoming contracts for sanitation department. The SaniTab and SaniTrack app that I mentioned previously are being used to monitor the usage of PPE. Now, in order to change their behavior on using these PPE, various training programs and resource materials for awareness generation have been prepared and used. To end my presentation, we would like to highlight what the city governments have achieved by adopting the citywide inclusive approach. So, like 4,000, more than 4,200 septic tanks have been desludged by scheduled emptying services in both the cities, which covers more than 7,400 properties. Most of the vulnerable properties have been serviced through the scheduled desludging. We have found a very high acceptance rate from households for the desludging services, like 95%. 28 million liters of septage has been safely delivered to both the treatment facilities. Households are now paying sanitation tax instead of a high user charges for desludging. Sanitation workers now work in a very safe environment with PPE. Now, in the entire process, women are being empowered by having safe access to FSM services, at the same time having an opportunity for livelihood. And both these cities, Vai and Sinnar, have been are one of the first cities to be declared ODF plus and plus plus by the government of India. So that's it from my end. And thank you all for listening. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Arwa. As I said, really impressive work, by University and working with the government of Maharashtra. We have, a quick question from Alex. And they're noting that how are you monitoring, or how did you go about monitoring and ensuring compliance of the MTS with the health and safety procedures?
Yes, that's a relevant question when we are talking about safety of the service as well as safety from the sanitation workers' perspective. So, as I mentioned, we have been using the IT-enabled monitoring systems for both the cities. So, we have a Sanitab app which tracks the entire process of scheduled desludging, like right from where which septic tank has been emptied, what is the volume, where is it located, and and then how is it discharged, how much of it is discharged at the FSTP, and this is done for both the private operator as well as for the ULB truck. So then we have a dashboard that has been prepared, which now both the city governments have been regularly using. So that was on the safe practices and monitoring the private sector. Now coming to the safety procedures by the sanitation workers. Now the Sanitab app also has uh, an option. I mean, not an option, but we do track how are the sanitation workers using the PPE. So, right from which type of gears they are wearing, how often they are wearing, everything is noted in that particular app. And we have noticed that earlier there was a low acceptance rate, but then through our initiatives, through awareness generation, the the usage increased. Yeah, I hope that answers his question.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks much, Arwen. I know we need to jump to the next presentation, but one quick question is, how long did it take to set up the model and start, the operation of scheduled desludging in the cities?
I would say it was a gradual process. The entire we started supporting the by municipal council in 2014, and by say we started scheduled desludging operation in late 2017, and now we have completed the one entire cycle. Also, we are
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Arwa. I have, additional questions on, because you noted the 8 different interventions that you implemented, and, it would be great to hear about, how the fecal sludge treatment plants are generating revenue and so forth. And I think we can talk about that during the panel discussion. And there are
yeah,
many more, questions that are coming up.
that will
Thank
be
you.
yes. Looking forward, yeah.
Perfect. So, unlike the case in India, in countries like Uganda and Eastern Africa, again, we are on a different, trajectory in terms of where they are, in terms of, the level of supportive institutions, but also whether there even exists a regulatory framework to support private sector entities, and if that is sufficient in incentivizing them to investing in FSM businesses. So our next presenter is Sharina Muniana. She's a development professional with extensive experience in value chain development and local capacity building. And she's going to present the Ugandan case where USAID is working towards enhancing access to safely managed services by supporting FSM entrepreneurs in improving their business models. And again, here looking at how these different elements, factors around financing, but also building local capacity of entrepreneurs, how this all feeds into supporting sustainable businesses, and hopefully that these solutions and interventions can go to scale. Sharina, over to you.
Thank you, Miriam, and hello, everybody. I'm excited to be here today to present about the work that we're doing in Uganda. I'll share my screen now. Yeah, so I'm here today to present to you a presentation on the financial viability of FSM entrepreneurs in Uganda. And I'm presenting this on behalf of Uganda's USAID-funded Uganda Sanitation for Health Activity, usha. My name is Sharina Munyana, as Miriam pointed out, and I am also the CEO of Sanitation Solutions Group, which is one of the partners on the usha project. I'll start by giving a background on the FSM context in Uganda. What we have seen from research in Uganda is that just 2.8% of the 1.8 million urban households in Uganda are connected to a sewer line, which means that we have the rest relying on on-site sanitation facilities. And in addition to that, just 42.7% of Uganda's urban population have access to safely managed sanitation services. So this means that there's a huge demand for FSM services in Uganda, given these statistics. The government interventions focus mainly on building treatment infrastructure and promoting emptyable toilets or latrines, and this makes emptying largely a private sector role. In terms of the focus that we have for safe and hygienic emptying, we focus on the mechanized emptying by cesspool trucks and the semi-mechanized emptying using the pump called a gulper. So just to give a background about usha, usha is a 5-year project that's aimed at achieving sustainable improvements in quality access and supply of water and sanitation services. On the FSM side, usha is working towards enhancing safely managed services by supporting FSM entrepreneurs or FSMEs to improve their business models. So our huge focus as usha is to ensure that there's viability, financial viability, as well as operational viability of the FSMEs we support. We are currently supporting 5 FSMEs across 4 districts in Uganda. So I will just briefly go through the approach that usha used in terms of trying to get some focus on the FSME viability. The project team conducted an initial research on 10 FSMEs across the 3 regions that we are focusing on. The findings from this initial research indicated that a large number of them are informal. So this means they're not registered or licensed. The majority of them run single truck businesses. So in the case of cesspool truck entrepreneurs, they have 1 cesspool truck, or in the case of gulper entrepreneurs operate with just 1 pickup truck or 1 tricycle. And it also came through that the majority of them have a very limited understanding of their revenues and costs, largely as a result of them keeping or having limited business records to which they refer. So we have to date prepared detailed profit and loss analyses for 5 FSMEs. So that is 4 cesspool truck entrepreneurs, CTEs, and 1 gulper entrepreneur. And this was mainly intended to understand the key challenges that they face, so as to allow us to focus our interventions towards these issues and allow them to achieve viability. The main finding that we came up with was that the FSMEs, while they can cover their direct costs, so that is just labor, fuel, and dumping costs, overall they incur net losses when the other costs that they incur are taken into account, and this overall significantly hampers their financial viability. So as mentioned earlier, we can see from the graphs of the one representative cesspool truck entrepreneur and 1 gulper entrepreneur that we analyzed and presented their findings in terms of their P&L analyses. So while they do make a gross profit, When other costs are taken into account, like bad debts and other operational costs that they incur, overall, both for the cesspool and the GALPA, they incur net losses. We could see that for the GALPA entrepreneurs, the net loss was almost 80%, whereas the net loss for the representative CTE was just over 20%. And the key challenges that we saw that came through were that they have low utilization, which means that there is limited demand for their services or insufficient demand activation, or in some cases, inability to meet the existing demand due to challenges with technology. We also found that they had high vehicle operating costs, so that is high fuel costs, maintenance or repair costs as a result of the type of vehicles that they use, which we found largely to be rather old or in a poor state or in a poor state that required high maintenance costs. And then the other key challenge we found lay in the fact that there were high customer defaults in terms of customer either inability or unwillingness to pay, as well as disputes in part between the FSMEs and the customers. So given the obstacles that we found, the key challenges, the usha team designed certain interventions intended to increase the FSME viability, both financial and operational. So the key ones that I will highlight is that we have trained FSMEs on their standard operating procedures and business procedures, which we found to be limited, and also are providing ongoing business advisory support to them. In addition, we are working on partnerships with financial institutions and banks to facilitate access to financing for them, mainly to support them to acquire multi-year or to acquire loans for their vehicles, particularly. And to date, we've supported 2 CTEs and 1 GALPA entrepreneur to secure multi-year loans for new vehicles. In addition, we've put focus on some form of blended financing where we have given one-time capital grants as partial payment for vehicles to the entrepreneurs, which we have seen has been a huge obstacle for the entrepreneurs. And so the project has been funding part of the capital grants for them to get access to their payments for vehicles. And also the project has focused on a monthly business support grant to help the FSMEs reach steady state, which is the minimum, reaching a point of operating and earning a minimum net income that they would need. And this monthly business support grant is both a form of incentives for achievement of targets and also in-kind grants like procurement of things like safety gear and the like that the entrepreneurs need. So again, in terms of the interventions, we have focused a lot on training sales agents, given that insufficient demand is one of the issues that we found that they have. And so this has blended in with print collateral like flyers and stickers to promote the FSM services and things like radio campaigns. And we have also gone through a process of finalizing a common brand identity for usha's partner FSMEs, which is the Clean Pit Emptying Services brand, under which all the FSMEs that we work with will be operating. So I'll just quickly go through pre and post before the FSM pilot that we did and during the FSM pilot intervention. I'll start with one for the cesspool entrepreneur. We can see that the performance of the CTE increased by almost 100% from 96 jobs to 191 jobs. And this during the pilot period was largely due to the fact that jobs were sourced through direct FSME sales that were part of the marketing interventions that the project provided. We also saw that the number of trips for the select FSME that we analyzed had their trips increased by 26% before the FSM pilot, and from 300 trips to 377 trips during the FSM pilot. In terms of revenue, we found that the entrepreneur experienced an 18% drop in their annual revenue. However, this was as a result of the fact that for some period during the FSM pilot, the entrepreneur was using the old truck that they had, and as a result had to reduce the price that they were charging. However, they have since acquired a new truck with the financing that we were able to support them to get, and they have since increased the price and stabilized the actual price that they charge. So then quickly for the FSME performance for the Galpa entrepreneur, again, we saw that pre and post intervention, there was an over 100% increase in the number of jobs that the GPE was doing. Again, sourced through sales agents and direct sales by the FSME. An increase in the number of barrels by 27%. Although during this period, there was a significant fall in the average household job size as a result of customers preferring less volumes due to some of the problems as a result of the pandemic. However, year on, pre and post intervention, the average revenue of the GPE increased by 31%. So just a summary of the achievements in the first pilot year. We have, for the 5 FSMEs that we've supported, had over 340 pit emptying jobs completed, which in turn has been up to 2.4 million liters of sludge safely managed. And we've had partner FSMEs entering the formal banking system, as noted, by securing loans to acquire their new vehicles. And in this last slide, I'll just quickly go through some of the project challenges that we faced. Our pilot launch was delayed as FSMEs and sales agents were unable to operate during the lockdown that was in Uganda from March last year. Then there was also poor sales agents performance due to the fact that some sales agents were having competing priorities, running small businesses or having limited suitability of emptying service offered. For example, cesspool trucks unable to operate in areas with unlined pits that were more appropriate for the Galpa entrepreneurs. We also have found that the Galpa sludge is difficult to dispose since it's thick, and this is something that leads to GPEs incurring additional costs to dilute thick sludge or have to transport to alternate disposal sites. In terms of M&E challenges that the project has faced, we've had poor data quality as sometimes FSMEs have provided incomplete or inaccurate data, and there have been some delays in collecting that data, and this is something that we are trying to adjust in our M&E system to remedy going forward. I thank you for your attention, and at this point, I'll take any questions.
Excellent, thanks very much, Sharina. One quick question, and this from Sandia, is what are the plans for ensuring that the FSMEs sustain annual revenues, profits? Are there any contracts or agreements executed for this? Ideally, the municipality would need to step in the viability gap funding if these FSMEs incur losses. Any insights on that?
Okay, thank you for that question. So in terms of the viability for the FSMEs, what we are really trying to focus on is having marketing done for their services. There's a huge focus on marketing because we do acknowledge that a lot of the jobs that sustain their revenue are largely institutional jobs. So we are trying to work on marketing and getting the entrepreneurs to operate at a level that they are registered, that they are supported to have a registration process that can then allow them to be able to take on certain jobs that require them to operate with some level of formality. Because for a large number of them, their informality does affect their ability to get some of these jobs. However, in addition, we are also supporting them to improve their business record keeping, because this then allows them to be able to price certain jobs rightly, because if they're not able to do that and they keep operating without looking at all the costs incurred, this could significantly hamper their ability to get on this. However, also in the forums that we have where we go to the districts, we ensure that we work with the district authorities to introduce these entrepreneurs to them, so that then these entrepreneurs are more recognized by the district, and this does allow their recognition by the districts to get them more in a mode that allows people to contact them for services that would allow them to operate at a higher level of scale than they previously did.
Excellent. Thanks much, Shireen. I know that we need to, move on, but there's a question from Anjali, who wants to know how the project actually supported the FSMEs to access bank support, financial support.
Okay. So in terms of the access to bank support, this was really something that required us to do a lot of background work. We approached financial institutions that were kind of already leaning towards funding sanitation, because in terms of the sanitation space and banking, you find that not many banks are willing to lend for sanitation. So it was important for us to work with the FSMEs to do detailed profit and loss analyses, because these kinds of records were required by the bank, and for a large number of the FSMEs, they do not have this in place. And then in addition, it was also important to provide some kind of projections to the bank, which again, the FSMEs have not really been accustomed to. So from the project team, there was a lot of business support and effort within that regard. However, even at the time of negotiating the loans, the project was, as I did mention, provided some kind of blended finance option where they provided some percentage, and the entrepreneur then was able to put the other 50% of the money. And this kind of gave some confidence to the banks. And this, I think, is something helpful when you look at the informality of operation of the FSMEs.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sharina. There are more questions, but I think we're going to, push those to the panel discussion and the Q&A session later. Thanks again.
Okay,
so now we're going to, yes, thanks. We're going to move over to Bangladesh, and we have Habibur from WhatsApp, who's going to talk to us a bit about how supportive policies and effective regulations are critical and needed to ensure that sustainable FSM solutions can actually go to scale. So Habibur leads the sanitation work at WhatsApp and has been working very intimately or closely with policy developers, and also engaged in capacity building of sanitation businesses. Habibur, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Welcome to my presentation. So I'd like to share the learning from developing institutional and regulatory frameworks for fecal sludge management in Bangladesh. Before start, actually, I'd like to share a story. In Dhaka, only 20% households and institutions are connected to network-based sewer system, and remaining 80% rely on on-site sanitation system. So to introduce the FSM service in the mega city Dhaka in 2014, from WhatsApp end, we talked this issue, on-site sanitation issue, with Dhaka Water Supply and Sewerage Authority. And that time they told that they are responsible, only for sewerage network. But regarding the on-site sanitation, they suggested us to talk with the city corporation. And then when we talked the on-site sanitation issue with city corporations, they told that they are responsible only for surface drain or lane drain. So when we talked FSM issue, they told that no, it's nowhere or somewhere in between. So in Bangladesh, actually, Bangladesh achieved the significant progress in stopping the open defecation by introducing the on-site sanitation facilities. Pits and septic tank are emptied by traditional pit emptiers manually, and collected sludge are disposed in nearby drains or surface water bodies, posing the significant health risks. Actually, there was no institutional and regulatory framework for fecal sludge management. So to address these kind of challenges in Bangladesh, celebrated the journey to zero upon achieving the zero defecation. Actually, a discussion has been seeded on challenges and way forward to achieve the safely managed sanitation, aiming the further achievement of SDG 6.2. So, and the sector actors have identified the need of an institutional regulatory framework for fecal sludge management, which includes the assigning responsibility of fecal sludge management to a specific institution based on the existing laws, policies, and strategies. Avoid overlapping, identify specific roles and activities with ensuring stakeholders coordination and facilitate sustainability. The first mentionable, the step towards the development of IRF for fecal sludge management has been taken on September 14. Actually, the government formed a working committee as a result of collective advocacy by civil society organization in November 2014, led by ITN Buet, the famous academia, to develop the institutional regulatory framework for fecal sludge management. We from WASAPENT also one of the member of that working committee, and then number of consultation took place across the country and beyond. And on October, so ITN Buet, placed the first up two working committee and shared the wider audience for taking the input from different corner. And finally, on November 2015, the framework sent to respective ministry. And after that, so number of improvement took place to make the institutional regulatory framework for fecal sludge management in final shape, involving the different ministries and respective departments. And finally, the framework got approval on May 17. So you can see here, the FSM valuation component in here. It's slide look simple, but journey was not actually. So problems were identified at different stages: absence of containment standard, no substantial and holistic solution for emptying and transportation, treatment and disposal even. That no one was responsible to supervise the whole value chain. And the institutional regulatory framework for fecal sludge management has been structured based on the collaboration of planning, management, and technology. So in IRF, so there are actually the four segments: one for mega city Dhaka, one for a city corporation, one for secondary towns, what we call the municipality, and the fourth one is for rural Bangladesh. The functionality. So let's talk about some precise picks from the institutional regulatory framework for fecal sludge management. So collaborations are suggested following a complex relationship flowchart. You can see in the right side of my presentation, but I will not talk detail on this. So Ministry of Rural, Local Government, Rural Development and Cooperative has made lead, and 12 other ministries are engaged, aiming smooth implementation of the institutional regulatory framework for fecal sludge management. Urban and rural local government institutions are also engaged, followed by 4 different types of institutional regulatory frameworks, and other stakeholders, including the private sectors and civil society organizations, are engaged. And the private sector states, actually, the private sector has been given an opportunity to engage as a partner to innovator and to support both the demand side and supply side. In supply side, so private sector are encouraged to engage with the local government institution and service delivery treatment, and private sector are encouraged to engage the research entities and academia organization to learn more about the scope of engagement. They are also encouraged to engage with civil society organization and existing network partners and learn more about their scope in engagement and how the WhatsApp is engaged the private sector actually. So you can see the model in here, the public-private partnership model. So in this model, so the city authority or utility own the emptying equipments and the treatment facilities supported by WhatsApp, water supply and water supply for urban poor. City authority or utility offered a lease agreement for vacuum tanker to private enterprises, and private enterprises to provide safe and professional FSM service to the city dwellers under the brand name SWIFT. Then private enterprises to pay a security deposit and a lease fee in return for access to these vehicles and the treatment facilities as well. So SWIFT offer differential pricing strategy to penetrate at least 30% of low-income customers. So it is actually the proven model, and it was successful for creating leads in different segments of the customers, which includes low-income customers, middle-income and high-income customers, and commercial customers as well. So that's all. Thanks for your passion. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Habibur. Interesting work going on in Bangladesh. I'm just curious, now that you've developed the framework, do you have a sense of what's next in terms of implementation of these frameworks?
So actually, after publishing the framework, so local government, took another initiative for developing the national action plan. So already national action plan approved for the municipality and the city corporations, and and local government also are in process for developing the another national action plan for the mega city Dhaka as well. So so this action plan actually gives the direction to the local government institutions and the FSM operators to implement the for unpacking the IRF, institutional regulatory framework for fecal sludge management. So this is a milestone for Bangladesh actually. So we are expecting that after implementing the national action plan for the fecal sludge management, I think Bangladesh will achieve a significant progress in this sector, like what we did in stopping the open defecation in Emrezi era.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Habibur. We'll wait. There are several questions. We'll wait until the panel discussion, hopefully, to cover those. Thanks very much again. Beyond looking at, supportive institutions and developing and implementing regulatory frameworks, we all recognize the importance of financing, both for public entities in ensuring service delivery, but also for private entrepreneurs to improve business viability and scaling, for example. Our next presenter is Barbara Senkwe from USAID's WashFin program. Barbara is a senior WASH governance advisor for WashFin, which is a global program working in 5 countries in Africa, 3 in Asia, working to leverage non-traditional financing for the WASH sector. Barbara is going to present the case of Senegal and Kenya, where USAID is working to expanding financing for fecal sludge management. Barbara, over to you.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me okay, Miriam?
Yes, I can. I think we all can.
Thank you. And good afternoon, good morning, everybody, wherever you are. As Miriam said, I'm going to talk very quickly about how do we finance the scaling up of FSM based on experience we are gaining from Senegal and Kenya. So I'll try and share my screen. Are you able to see my screen, please?
Yes, Barbara.
All right, thank you so much. So I'll be talking about work we're doing in Senegal and Kenya. And I think just to give a context as to why these two countries, in Senegal,
Barbara, sorry to interrupt. Do you mind putting it on, slide share, please?
Okay, is that okay now?
Perfect, yes.
Yeah. So in the case of Senegal, we are working at the national level with the national organization there that is responsible for sanitation owners. And then in the case of Kenya, we work at utility level in one of the counties in Kenya. So the two examples give you a different view as to what is happening when you look at this from a national level, and then what is happening when you look at this from municipality or county level. And in talking about this, we're really looking for money. Where is the financing going to come from to be able to scale up FSM activities in our countries? And so by way of organization of the presentation, I'll tell you very quickly about WashFin, and then the work we are doing in Senegal and Kenya, and then we'll talk about some of the results we are seeing. This is still an ongoing activity, and then some of the lessons that we are learning from these two countries. In terms of WashFin, as Miriam said, this is a USAID program which is aimed at closing financing gaps to achieve universal access. And I think the driving force behind this for USAID is the fact that our public resources are limited. And even if you asked Kenya or Zambia to increase their public budget to WASH, there's no way it will close the funding gap because the gap is really just that large. So the question is, how can we bring in other financing? In particular, how can we bring in funds or financing which is available in the private sector? So we work in 8 countries, which you see on that map, 3 in Asia and 5 in Africa. And today I'll be talking about our work only in Kenya and in Senegal. And our activity started in 2016. We will close in 2022. We have so far managed to mobilize $34 million for the WASH sector across those 8 countries. And some of the numbers you'll be seeing today are related specifically to the money raised on the sanitation side. So the work that we're doing in both Senegal and Kenya, the question of how can we get in more funding meant we had to do quite a lot of work, very similar to what Sherin shared in what they're doing in Uganda, except in our case, because the overall objective of our program is to raise financing. So we therefore focused more on the stronger, already more established fecal service providers. And so in the case of Senegal, for instance, we are working with almost 120 sanitation service providers, but from those 120, we focus on the large 5, and then another group, we group them into different cohorts, because we are trying to see what you need to do for each group in order for them to be able to raise financing. Now, in Kenya, we're working with one, I would not say it's a large company, but it is medium, it is not small. And it is working at the top end, if I can use that terminology, in the sense that they're not just providing fecal sludge management services, they're actually recycling fecal sludge into briquettes and organic fertilizer. So they're a little bit more advanced than your normal small scale service provider in the FSM space. So when we look at the two countries, what we find is a lot of constraints. The private sector is there to provide these services, but they face quite a number of challenges across the enabling environment piece, across the technical piece, and also on the financial. And just to highlight a few things, I think the issue of informality, which Sherina also talked about there, is a big issue still in the FSM space. A lot of the people who are working in this space operate in a very informal way, which makes it very difficult, especially when you start talking about accessing private financing. But beyond that, what we are also seeing is that the public sector across Africa, generally, they tend to be not very familiar with FSM. And I know that when Miriam started, she talked about, we've made progress, But that progress is yet to translate into reality in many countries when it comes to how the public sector perceives FSM and how they go about creating that environment to allow the private sector to thrive. And part of this challenge comes because most of our public institutions on the continent are very much focused on sewerage, because that has been the mode, and that has been the way we are trained as engineers, is you go and build a sewer system. So to start talking about fecal sludge management, we still require to change a lot of attitude, especially in the public service, and then which then translates into these inadequate policies and regulatory frameworks. So in that respect, I think Habiba shared what we see in Asia is a little bit more advanced than what we have on the continent. It's beginning to change, but we've still got a lot of work to do to push the enabling environment to allow the kind of policy and regulatory frameworks that would facilitate FSM. And then linked to that, when we look at the type of companies we're working with, is that most of them would be dealing with technologies which are not proven. Many engineers will know how to build a mechanized sewage treatment plant. They'll know how to build sludge beds, conventional sludge beds. But when we begin to talk about things like recycling of waste, this is new territory. And we've still got a lot of work to do to convince governments that these technologies can work. And then a lot of things similar to what has already been shared around limited number of sludge treatment facilities. Yes, you can have your providers, but if there's nowhere for them to dump the fecal sludge, you've still got a problem. The use of odd trucks, which already I think Sherina also talked about there. And then on the finance side, where we find the biggest challenges seem to be the business aspects are very weak in some of these companies, especially the very small ones. They have very poor financial management systems. If you go to a bank manager, he doesn't even want to listen to you because you're not giving him what he is looking for. They have limited ability to develop business plans. And one major challenge we find on the supply side of money is that the service providers, because they work in the wash space, they are perceived as being too public, by financial institutions, and therefore the financial institutions tend to be scared of these enterprises, and that can be quite a challenge. So in terms of what WashFin does, given those constraints, is we try and figure out what needs to happen, what do these companies need to do to be able to convince a bank manager that they can actually be given a loan and be able to pay it back. So we work on improving credit worthiness and improving their outlook, their financial and technical outlook, essentially positioning them for a private lender of money, not for the public sector, which is mostly your development partners or the government. And that means we normally start with looking at the technical side. Do they have a project? And even if they have a project, is it feasible from a technical point of view? But beyond technical feasibility, does it have financial viability? Because the bank wants to know that you'll be able to pay him back. So we spend a lot of time working with them around that. On the financials, we spend a lot of time looking at internally, how are they positioned for financing? Do they have financial models which can be looked at, by a potential lender? And do they have individualized financial tools? Because each company is at a different level of development. So some are a little bit more advanced, others are much less so. So what do they have that if they go and present themselves before a bank manager, he'll be able to look at them with a good, good mindset? And on the supply side, we find that the banks themselves or the lenders, they don't really know the sanitation space, because this is not traditional, banking sector work. So we do spend a lot of time helping the banks themselves to understand the sanitation space, that this is a market. Yes, challenges, but you can work through those challenges and be able to provide financing to these companies. And then we do spend a lot of time on actually providing transaction advisory support, both in terms of sharing information between the supply side and the demand side, but also structuring the transactions themselves, because this is a space, like I said, where the banks have not really played a role. So what does a loan to a fecal sludge service provider look like? It would be different to providing a loan for an energy service provider, for instance. And then in some cases, depending on the size of the company, we also support them on the financial negotiations until they get to closure of those transactions. So what have we?
Just to note, we have a few minutes left.
Yeah, what have we achieved so far? I think in the case of Senegal, just to highlight that we've managed to raise $5.6 million for a number of companies there. And in the next year, we're anticipating that we'll be able to raise about $6.2 million from the private sector. So just showing that it is actually possible to raise financing for these companies. And I think the key point there is the last bullet there, that we have now 9 companies, 9 banks that are interested in providing support to the SSPs. Whereas when we started, this was a sector they could really engage with. In the case of Kenya, we've managed to raise $2.5 million. Now it's smaller, but this is just for one company, whereas in the case of Senegal, that is for a number of companies. So in itself, it's actually a large achievement. And I think the key thing here in the case of Senegal is that we are really working with them on enhancing their factory model, so that they can get many other people, equity partners, people providing loans to be able to support their growth. And then finally, what have we learned? I think a thing here is that the private sector is ready to work with the public sector. And there are opportunities for funding the private sector, but it requires a lot of work. It does require a lot of work. We've got to work on the enabling environment to create that space where the banks feel, yes, this is a sector we can work with. We've got to collaborate much more across development partners so that you are not pulling in different directions. And I think our work in Senegal has really shown when you come together, it's very possible to achieve quite a lot in this space. And I think we've really got to work on getting governments to prioritize FSM. Yes, we have made progress, but our experience is we've still got a lot of advocacy that we need to do to convince governments that this is part and parcel of their solution for serving the people, especially those in the low income areas. And thank you very much, Miriam.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Barbara. I have a number of questions, but I recognize that we're running out of time, unfortunately. These sessions are recorded, and so if you have questions, please go ahead and post them, because then the presenters are able to go back and respond to those questions. And if you review the session, you'll be able to then access those responses. Whilst we may not be able to address them now, we will do so later, and you'll be able to access those responses. And so finally, I'm going to ask Kevin, who's the director of Zambia's National Water Supply and Sanitation Council, to provide a perspective on looking at the regulatory frameworks. Well, not really regulatory frameworks, but general frameworks for FSM service provision and regulation, how Zambia went about developing, but also implementing those plans, and where they are as a nation on the trajectory of ensuring sustainable FSM at scale. Kevin?
Right, and thank you for having me. So I'll just look at the frameworks we've developed in terms of our service provision as we regulate the Zambian sector, particularly on urban on-site sanitation, but also fecal sludge management. Just a bit of some background where we're coming from. I think it was clear when we analyzed that there was massive data for sanitation and also standards both for on-site sanitation and fecal sludge management were lacking. The coordination agreement on what is acceptable sanitation was also a challenge. Inadequate coordination and actors, data for sanitation, on-site sanitation, and obviously the issue of how do you enforce resulting in pollution of water. And also in terms of now the on-site sanitation facilities, how they're constructed. Again, we didn't have standards. So we had poorly constructed facilities, which meant even emptying very unhygienic. And so even what has already been shared, the issue of fecal sludge management treatment plants were absent, and uncontrolled pricing. So these are some of the challenges that we thought we needed to address. And just to give a context in terms of Zambia, we are talking about almost 40% of the population are covered by the sewer network. It means about over 60% they don't have this sewer network. So with that, it's clear that we need to also focus on on-site sanitation, and hence they need to look at how do we manage the sludge as well. So we had to respond by coming up with a regulatory framework for on-site sanitation and fecal sludge management, which was launched in 2018. It's a whole framework that looks at the number of stakeholders involved and trying to define what roles and responsibilities they should have. So we looked at ourselves as a regulator. We had to define our roles and responsibilities in terms of the need to issue a license to the commercial utilities who are the providers of this service. And also if they have to engage a third party, we have to consent in terms of the conditions. And also it's clear that our role is to regulate on-site sanitation and fecal sludge management. There are also the service providers who are supposed to be licensed, and these are supposed to now do the actual management of sanitation, and they have the responsibility to ensure this is sustainable. And also they could delegate to either private operators or community-based organization to manage fecal sludge management. And also where they don't have presence and there's no community-based organization or private sector, then the local authorities are engaged to cover that area. We had also to define the roles of the local authorities who continue to provide licenses for business or trade licenses to the emptiers, and these continue to enforce their bylaws for better operations of sanitation. And also we have another regulator who focuses on the environment. So that had to be defined as well, so that their roles are also clear. So these are involved in licensing trucks that are carrying sewerage or sludge, and also monitor the effluent that get into the environment to avoid pollution. And then standards had the body that looks at standards. And so we have a new institutional setting where ourselves as the regulator for water supply and sanitation, and also the regulator that looks at the protection of the environment, all sit in one ministry. And then the role, as I've already discussed, for the operators who are the commercial utilities, and the other options they have to provide these services. So as you can see from these number of stakeholders, there is need for good coordination if things have to work. And as in trying to now look at what is happening, we've tried to look at the sanitation, the whole sanitation value chain, and what is involved, and then also define the main facilities and equipment that are used and how these should be managed, and at the end of the day, how the sludge is disposed of. So we've looked at the off-site sanitation facilities, but we've also looked at where there are on-site facilities for high cost and former areas. We've looked at the whole value chains and looking at the interventions that are needed and how all that needs to be coordinated. So we've also have the peri-urban areas and informal sector, which is slightly peculiar, and how the value chain also looks like, and what interventions and what should happen in that value chain. Following that, we have now started implementing the on-site sanitation and fecal sludge management strategy, where we're basically looking at the institutional and legal framework We have looked at, looking at the baseline for sanitation. We need to have information for us to be able to manage this. And we've developed regulatory tools and also had to revise the licensing conditions and also the license to cover on-site sanitation. Traditionally, the commercial utilities were focusing on the reticulated system, sewer system, but we said we need to revise the conditions so that it can cover the sanitation, the whole sanitation value chain. And obviously it meant we needed to strengthen the regulator and WASCO and also develop a benchmarking system for on-site sanitation and fecal sludge management. What has happened so far is that we've changed the condition for licenses for utilities to include on-site sanitation and fecal sludge management. Also, the name for the utility companies has changed from sewerage to sanitation. So they used to be called water and sewerage companies, but now they are water and sanitation companies. We've also approved the permitting conditions so that when they involve third parties, there are these conditions that should apply. And also we've developed a code of practice for on-site sanitation and fecal sludge management, though this is still in progress. We've also been able to develop an SI or statutory instrument for on-site sanitation. It's still a draft, but it's something that we think we need to quickly turn around. And there's a pricing strategy for on-site sanitation and fecal sludge management, which has been incorporated in the tariff setting guidelines for implementation. We've also gone ahead to assess the organization and institution capacities of the commercial utilities to undertake on-site sanitation and fecal sludge management, and the report is now complete. And based on that, we should be able to now enforce the regulation of on-site sanitation and fecal sludge management. We're also supporting the GIS mapping on on-site facilities. Basically, we've targeted 2 provinces, where the capital is, which is Lusaka, the northern part, and also the Copper Belt part. Now, to try and manage all this, we had to form what are called joint implementation team that have been set up to implement the whole process. So we've looked at the Lusaka province, we've looked at Central province, and also Luapula. Now, this is a team that involves the local authorities, health practitioners, the environmental people, ourselves, the utilities, together form a team that would assist in the implementation of this whole process. Our experience is that we need to be flexible if we have to deliver in terms of what we are adopting as service delivery models. We need to ensure there are incentives and financial resources to set up and implement workable on-site sanitation and fecal sludge management solutions. And there should be a comprehensive data collection or survey that would then inform the sector in terms of what we are dealing with and how we are moving forward. And obviously the need for continuous organization development if we have to make progress. And sensitization in terms of on-site sanitation and also fecal sludge management is still critical if we have to make progress. So basically, I thought I should just share those issues in terms of what is happening in Zambia. I thank you for listening.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kevin. To follow up quickly, I just would, interested to know what are some of the challenges that, some of the key challenges that you face in implementing the regulatory framework and how, how you addressed those.
Okay, I think one thing that is clear is even from the assessment that we've conducted in the service providers, I think the capacity needs to be developed. And even as we implement, this is something that we've taken as part of our strategy to try and build capacities amongst the people that are service providers. But also, this is something that has not been happening. Traditionally, I think utilities were focused on sewerage. Now that change also becomes difficult at times to deal with. So we are dealing with change management to try and help the utilities, appreciate the need for us to look at sanitation and not only sewerage. So obviously it means we need to also manage that particular change, but also in terms of the skills that are needed. I think what is clear is that there should be new sets of skills that needs to be developed if we have to manage sanitation and fecal sludge management. And again, as part of that, we've also involved the academia so that we begin to influence the skills needs for the sector. And I think those are some of the challenges we are facing as we implement the regulatory framework.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kevin. And to the attendants, we were running a bit against time. And so if you permit us an additional 5 to 7 minutes, that would be great so that we can get, our presenters to address some of the questions that have been posed. So Barbara, one of the, main questions that was asked is, how did, you manage to crowd the impact investors in?
Thank you, Miriam, for that. And so in the case of the impact investors, the best example that I can give is the work we've been doing in Kenya with sanitation. And part of what we did was essentially positioning sanitation in a manner that made them much more attractive to the investors. And that meant working with them on preparing, we call them teasers, financial teasers for the potential investors. And the teasers essentially will pull out in a very summarized format, what are the key benefits that you gain as an investor, whether it's a bank or whoever we are targeting, and pulling out really those key things that they would be keen to see as a potential investor, and packaging that in a manner that is convincing. So that has mostly been the way we've been we've worked with sanitation on the impact investors. And let me also just take this opportunity, Miriam, to also respond to one question that Mira asked on are we working on around the policy? And yeah, in the case of Senegal, it's been very interesting because the Senegalese FSM is quite advanced, I think, as most people know. But you also had a problem in the sense that the owners, the public entity, was very much focused on only on the big four companies. But we've been working with them around structuring a new relationship in which the bigger companies subcontract the smaller companies, so that we address the issue that Sherina raised, in the case of Uganda, where they are too small to get any public contracts that enables them to grow. So in trying to address that, we are working with owners very much around how do you get the big FSMs to play almost the role of big brother or big sister to the smaller ones, so that you can then build the whole value chain and not just focusing on the 3 or 4 that have already made it. So there are quite a number of interesting things I think that we are doing there, and we'll be happy to share some of that as people have questions for us.
Excellent, thanks, Barbara. And just one more question before I move on to the other presenters. You indicated that financing institutes are not exposed to the sanitation sector. What were the key elements that helped to bring them, at least the ones that you were able to bring into mainstream? And what are the possibilities of channeling such support from banks through local governments?
Yeah. So again, if I take the case of Senegal, where in terms of working with the banks in particular, we've been very successful there. A lot of it was just providing information, really sitting down with the banks and telling them, the sector is not what you think it is. We understand where you're coming from. We understand your anxieties as a bank, but here is the data, here is the evidence. Yeah, there will be some people you cannot lend to, but there is also a group that you can lend to. And then going even beyond that, in the case of Senegal now, we are working on a product which is called the PAC, it's the Truck Fleet Renewal Program, where basically we are saying, look, you can actually provide a line of credit for these companies to be able to replace their old trucks. So you deal with some of the issues again that have been raised on the technical side, but you develop the product together, between the banks, the development partners, the organization that represents all these FSM service providers in Senegal. And you come up with a product that works both for the bank and it also works for the service provider. So in the case of the fleet renewal, for instance, the product is a lease to own product, and that minimizes some of the risks that the banks are seeing when they look at our sector, and you remove some of that risk. But in those discussions, you also have a lot of conversations with USAID and others around, can somebody provide some guarantee mechanism, that makes it easier for the banks to come in, and especially as they are learning about the sector, we need a way to make them feel comfortable. So working with guarantee providers is absolutely critical, but also coming together as development partners and saying with one voice, this is what we are going to do, and we are standing behind you as a bank, we are standing behind you as an entrepreneur. So really bringing everybody to the table is absolutely critical.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Barbara. I'm going to pivot quickly to Arwa on the case in Maharashtra, and just trying to understand a bit, how the FSTPs are generating revenues, and do they have a process of ring fencing their revenue such that it doesn't go into a general pool and gets allocated or assigned to other activities? Just trying to understand the business model around treatment a little bit better.
Yes, thanks for the question. So in case of both the cities of Vai and Sinnar, um, a sanitation tax has been levied. So and both I mean, the sanitation tax is part of the property tax now. So it becomes more easy for any ULB to recover the expenses that have been incurred. So that is the major aspect. And on the you also mentioned on the resource recovery aspect of the FSTPs, and how does that come into picture for the financial viability. So on that, I would like to highlight that FSTPs are smaller in size, and when we are talking about financial viability, due to the lower volumes of the water and solids, it does not fully contribute towards the financial viability. And apart from the lower volumes, also enabling environment through policies on reuse, maturity of markets for the reused products, and also an awareness generation is still at a nascent stage. So that's from the FSTP side of the things.
Excellent. Thanks, Arwa. Yeah, it's always, I was curious, and maybe I'll follow up with you later, whether the sanitation tax is sufficient in covering, I guess now it's just maybe the operational and maintenance cost. But yeah, maybe I'll follow up with you later for
Yeah,
more.
just to answer that, it does cover the operational cost, and part of it is also taken from the property tax. And for the capital cost, and there is a 14th FC grants that most of the all the cities in Maharashtra get. So that is being used for the capital expenditure of the FSTPs.
Okay, excellent. Emma, I wanted to thank you. I wanted to get your insights on what you think, what the role of, subsidies should play in improving access to FSM services, especially for low-income citizens. And just wanted to get your insights on that. We've talked a bit about sanitation tax? Is there room for us to look at subsidies, cost subsidies and so forth for households that simply cannot afford to pay for FSM services?
Yes. So coming on the inclusive aspect of it and affordability and the subsidies that you mentioned, uh, for access related aspect, I mean for construction of individual toilets to begin with, the government of Maharashtra and government of India have been providing subsidies for construction of individual toilets for households who cannot afford to build. So part of the cost is provided through the subsidies. That's on the access part. Then coming to the emptying part of it and the treatment, both cities have levied sanitation tax, as you know. But earlier they used to pay user charges, which were um, in the hands of private operators. So which was like around 3,000 or even more in smaller cities. So now with the application of sanitation tax, it becomes affordable because if you are staying in a smaller household, then you're paying lower property tax and thereby it becomes equitable. So I
Excellent.
hope you
Yes, sorry,
I answered your question.
thank you very much, Arwa. I don't know, Ella, do you have any additional insights on that?
Sorry?
No,
Are you
Ella.
asking me?
Yes.
Oh,
Oh, sorry, I was just curious to get your insights on, what the role of subsidies or, should subsidies play in improving access to FSM services, especially for low-income citizens?
yeah, thanks for that question. I think for a while in the sector, we weren't really, a lot of folks were trying not to talk that much about subsidies. So there's been a lot of pendulum about it. So within USAID, there's a lot of internal discussions about how we position ourselves as a development agency in terms of subsidies. What do we do? At the same time, for instance, I manage the WashFin program that's aimed at mobilizing public and private finance in the sector. But even as we talk about the importance of private finance, we're also really thinking about, okay, how can we make sure that that's affordable to people who can't? And so I'm not sure how much people know about that park program that Barbara mentioned in Senegal. So that's a blend. I mean, there's a lot of talks about blended finance and blended, just mixing grants and loans. And so that's where we're at in terms of thinking about how to make sure that this is available to low income populations. So we're constantly thinking about it when we design our programs and as we implement. Don't have an agency answer, an official agency answer on this, but it's definitely, we have to think about targeted public and private subsidies if we want to scale up and really get to universal access and sustainable services. And so we're committed to figuring that out and really making sure that that's targeted and they're smart subsidies. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ella. I know that we're way over time. Just one last question to you, Sharina. We're just curious to know what the response has been from, the entrepreneurs that you worked with in terms of, being more diligent about record keeping and so forth, and around, their business aspects of their business. Did they have to hire additional staff to support them with that? Or did they, the truck operators, essentially just get into the thick of things and, started, business, planning their business better and so forth?
Okay, so thanks for that question. I think that the answer is kind of twofold. The entrepreneurs, once they realize the value of the record keeping, so for example, in terms of whether they can then see that previously they thought that they were making a profit, and then by keeping records, they get a sense of the fact that what they thought were profits are actually not, because there are other hidden costs that they weren't capturing. They are keen to then want to keep the business records, particularly when they see the benefit to them. I think it's important to note that they are at different levels or stages, and what you've said is quite right, that they might not have the staff in place who are really maybe have the qualifications to do things to the level that, say, a corporate business would. But once they are trained to understand some of those costs, we've seen that most of them are very keen to, say, graduate through different steps, be it starting by transferring those records that they previously didn't have at all to just book, like writing down in a book from one stage to the next. They are very open to the idea then of record keeping, as opposed to having no records as previously. And it's I think important to note that they won't then just suddenly want to advertise positions specifically for that, but they'll try to work with the team that they have to do that. And it's important to then build or work with them at those stages, so that then they shouldn't incur costs that they can't afford at that time, rather than work with the team that they have to see how best that they can keep those records. And I think it's also important to note that because of the system that we've used, where we try to incentivize them to perform at a certain level, those that the FSMEs that perform at a certain level of the target receive some kind of business support grant. We've seen that once they've seen these kinds of things coming through, they actually do then want to understand their records better and aspire towards working to that target. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sharina. And thank you to the participants that are still online. We're 15 minutes over. There's so many, many more questions that, we could talk about and discuss, but I recognize that our time is up. And so based on, the discussion that we've had and the presentations, we recognize that scaling, sustainable and inclusive fecal sludge management, involves a whole lot of moving parts, and different countries at different trajectories. There are cases like, the case in India, Maharashtra, which is amazing and is showing great potential for scaling up. But then again, there's a need to consider contextual factors when you're thinking about replicating it to different countries. And there comes the issue of data availability and the quality of data. And so we could go on with the discussion for a while, but I think we'll wrap it up here. We'll make sure to respond to the questions that you have posed in the Q&A. And so later on, if you have the opportunity, you can access those responses as well. I'd like to thank our presenters. It's been, really interesting presentations and information, just learning how things are working in Eastern Africa versus in South Asia and so forth. Thank you very much again, and I'll see to joining many of you in our other sessions. Have a great day, and thank you.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.